I love just to learn, but if I
Mm.
don't make application of it, I'm not becoming, um, I'm not becoming a little Christ. And
Mm.
so that's the goal. The goal isn't to learn.
Mhm.
The goal is to be transformed. Learning supports transformation. And so don't get looped into just this sort of endless cycle of learn, 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 and it never get expressed in transformation.
Welcome to Great Bible Teacher Interviews. Hello, I'm Rick Jordan, President of Great Bible Teachers. And each week I have the opportunity to interview an author, scholar, or practitioner. We talk about the Bible, or biblical interpretation, or spiritual formation. Today I'm very pleased to have the interview to present to you with Chad Hall. Chad and I have known each other for many years, before he became a minister, actually, and I was actually even on his ordination council. In the meantime, he has gone on to get his 3 seminary degrees. He has written books. He has become a very well-known, recognized person in the coaching field. So I asked him how coaching, what he has learned about coaching, has affected what he has learned about teaching the Bible, as he is also active in his church as a Bible study teacher. Chad has had many experiences in ministry. He has been a pastor. He has been a founding pastor. He has been a denominational leader, and he has also now had this coaching ministry for 18 years. I hope you'll enjoy this interview. Chad, welcome to Great Bible Teachers.
Hey, Rick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. I hope you are. And you know, we got to chat just a little bit before getting started, and it sounds like you had an early morning. So I'm glad you're able to be up and about so early and be with me this morning.
Well, you know, I have a very important dog that requires my attention at 5 a.m. So it's good to be up with him, but it's good to be with you too. You're also important.
Chad, tell us a little bit about yourself. Particularly, I'm interested in, our ministry as Great Bible Teachers. So who has been someone that's been an influence in your life as a great Bible teacher?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And one thing I know about myself is I tend to be a bit conceptual and theoretical, and I take in information that way. I relate to God probably more through intellect, at least the little bit that I have. That's how I relate to God. And so I was thinking about the people who've really been instrumental for me, and they actually have been more what I would think of as authors.
Mm-hmm.
And so, N.T. Wright comes immediately to mind in terms of somebody who, for me, opens scripture up in a new way, helps me understand scripture, apply scripture. But I think why N.T. Wright has been so powerful for me is he's really good at setting the context. So rather than just sort of pulling out, oh, this passage means this, or this chapter, or this even book of the Bible means whatever, his work on Paul is he very much sets a context of God is up to something in the world. He's initiating and expanding a kingdom. And so you gotta frame Paul within that context. And then within that frame, you can understand, what Paul is saying in Romans 8 or whatever, or wherever. And so that kind of Bible teaching really resonates for me. I like to understand the context, the big picture, and then how the more kind of tangible pieces kind of fit into that. And then I also just like kind of more of a philosophical engagement. And so even people like, I don't know if you'd qualify him or classify him as a Bible teacher, but C.S. Lewis, who can take theological principles and really help them be understandable. So anyway, I don't know if I'm putting those guys in the right category, but for me, that's who comes to mind.
Yeah, that's great. And I've heard N.T. Wright called like the 21st century C.S. Lewis. So both of those guys kind of are in that gentle apologetics way of writing and
Yeah.
describing the Christian life.
And another person that maybe you reminded me of, I really like Tim Keller. I remember you and I went to hear Tim Keller a few years ago together.
That's right.
Again, as just somebody who can open scripture, give the big picture context, and do it in um, I think, an honest way, not necessarily with an agenda or something for people, but he's got an honest exposition of scripture, but then makes it very applicable. And I think he fits in that same sort of gentle apologetics kind of way of unpacking scripture. That really resonates for me. I could listen to most of Tim Keller's preaching and teaching and just really be encouraged and instructed, and I hopefully grow stronger because of it.
I remember that time we went to hear him, and I remember taking a lot of notes, which are probably somewhere. But what I remember is the Q&A time. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll remember this, but there was a guy who came up to the mic, and it was like, man, you were just so brilliant in how you answered these questions. It's like anything somebody asks, you got, this answer for them. And how can I learn to do what you do so I can put people in their place? Was kind of his
I remember.
attitude. I don't know if he used those words, but you could just tell it's like, I'm gonna slam some Bible on you. And Keller was just, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not what we're about. It was,
Right.
that's not, you study and you learn and you let God's Spirit work in you. But the goal is not to pound the Bible on somebody, but to,
Mhm.
gently lead them to
Yeah.
truth.
And I think that's a common thread for me, and maybe why I'm drawn to people like Lewis or Wright or Keller, is that they tend to be less interested in giving the right answer,
Mm,
and they tend to be more interested in helping you become the right kind of person.
mm, yeah.
So, what you might think of as virtue, ethics, or character development, that idea of, scripture rightly understood, it penetrates, we participate with God and what God is doing. And we don't just know things that are, new and better, ideas or thoughts or truths. We actually become a different kind of person.
Mhm.
And so, like the guy who was asking Tim Keller that question, he really didn't need more answers or information. He needed to just kind of shift from a quarrelsome person to a kind person.
Yeah.
And that's the project that God is involving and including all of us in. And I think, Lewis and Keller and N.T. Wright, they each of them in his own way um, puts helps us understand scripture within that context of what's God up to in your life. He's making you into someone who's fit to inhabit heaven and actually like it.
Mhm.
And other people enjoy you being there. He's making you into a better person. And that's what I love about, and I love about somebody like Tim Keller. He doesn't take that sort of God's care developing you as a character, as a person, and therefore you don't have to have well-reasoned, you know, understanding of scripture. It's a both and. It's both an intellectual and a applicable ethical kind of application.
Mhm. So you and I have known each other a long time, and I know you have had a variety of different kinds of ministries. You've been in the church in ministry. You've been a pastor, a church start pastor, even. You have done denominational work, and you've done institutional work. Maybe not officially as a chaplain, but as a coach that your Christian faith has just kind of been integrated with that, I believe. Um, and then you've got this ministry, Coach Approach Ministries, and so can you tell us a little bit about that? Like how did that get started, and why it was so intriguing to you, to enough so that you've given your life to it now?
Yeah, or at least part of my life. Sometimes, yeah,
Right.
I also give part of my life to my dog for those early morning walks. But
Is the dog
no,
a
so
human?
Coach Approach, the Coach Approach Ministries came about in the mid 2000s. As you mentioned, I served on a denominational staff. I was a part of the North Carolina Baptist, and it was, not to make a long story longer, but I'll give a little bit of background. So when I came on there, we were called consultants,
Mhm.
and honestly, what we were workshop leaders.
Mm.
Um, we had the title of consultant. Well, when I took the job, I was thinking a consultant was like a management consultant, somebody from Boston Consulting who comes in, how they would come in and help a company become stronger and more profitable or whatever. Well, as a leadership consultant, as a church consultant, I was thinking I would come in and help churches become stronger, develop better leadership, that kind of thing. And so that's really not what the job was. The job was teach workshops to peddle Lifeway products. So
Mm.
they could have just written a really short job description, teach workshops to peddle Lifeway products. By the way, that's not a slam on Lifeway products. Lifeway has very good, training materials. But the mentality was, oh, that's what's going to facilitate change. If only people use these, this curriculum or whatever.
Mhm.
But a handful of us who were titled consultants, we begin to push just a little bit to say, it'd be nice if we actually did consulting, like, and to do that, we would maybe need to be trained in some consulting. And so the leadership of the denomination at that time kind of looked around and, who could we bring in? And really in a kind of, I'm going to call this godly ignorance, brought in some folks to train us in coaching, and without really kind of getting the differentiation between consulting and coaching, a difference that I now, or a distinction I very much understand now. At the time I really didn't, but we began to get trained as coaches, who could come alongside leaders and entire congregations. And that became a big part of our ministry. Again, just a handful of us who were on the staff. And then there was a change in leadership with the denomination, and coaching, which was very front burner for us, was going to be moved to the back burner, and honestly, probably off the stovetop.
Mm.
And I tell you, I was hooked. I had already gotten hooked on coaching. I saw that as a um, majorly effective way to create impact and to just affect change. And I've been coaching leaders in churches. And so there was a team of us that started Coach Approach Ministries kind of out of that movement that was already kind of in place with the denomination. And so myself, the lady who was the head of coaching for the Ken Blanchard companies, another lady who had started coaching at IBM back in the 90s, and a few others, we started Coach Approach. I somehow drew either the short straw or the long straw, and was the president of Coach Approach. And honestly, it's just kind of evolved in the years and decades since, to now it is a ministry that trains people to use coaching either within their ministry or to help ministry leaders. And some people who take our training just are becoming coaches. They open a coaching practice. And so anyway, I don't know. That's not the short version, but that's maybe the medium version of the story.
Yeah, I think it's a great story. I'm appreciative of how God leads us in ways we don't expect, and how you were not expecting that this is what you were going to be doing when you went there, and then you weren't expecting the training that would guide your life after that. It's like
Right.
it just keeps dropping unexpected things in our lives sometimes. And
Yeah.
um, you hinted at this, but I want you to go a little bit further on this about because we are teachers, but as teachers, we also want to use different techniques. And so some teachers are, straight lecturers, and others are, let's open the Bible someplace and I'll read a passage and anybody have an opinion and just,
Right.
that's it. So you've got those kind
Yeah.
of that range of I'm in total control as the lecturer, and you're in total control. I'm just here as a reader of the scripture. So you got that big range, and where do you see coaching fitting in? Coaching kinds of approach, attitude, questions for the Bible study teacher.
Yeah. And it's really helpful to make the distinction that coaching and teaching are not synonymous.
Mhm.
So coaching can become a way that would complement and hopefully, accentuate in a positive way the teaching that we're trying to do. But they're certainly not synonymous. Coaching's not a replacement for teaching in the same way that it's not a replacement for preaching or being a pastor or other things. So I really want to humbly put coaching in its place. It's a good place. It's a powerful place. It's not to say that, oh, don't teach. Instead, you should coach. That's,
Mhm.
I just like to be clear because people think, oh, this guy's all about coaching. He's not about anything else. And that's not the case. So the way I have to approach it is, and I'm heavily influenced by adult learning principles. So I'm thinking a little bit less about teaching. I'm thinking more about learning.
Mhm.
So is there learning happening? So is the person, and that could be for the teacher or for the people who aren't teaching, there could be learning all around. And so learning would be there's new awareness and there's maybe a motivation to do something with that new awareness.
Mm.
That's ultimately, I think, as Bible teachers, as Sunday school leaders, as preachers, as teachers, that's what we're looking for. So the way coaching kind of complements or comes alongside of it is in this sort of adult learning world. The idea isn't, if you just get the right information to your ears, the kingdom will come in or something like that.
Yeah.
It's that the learner has to process information. And so, very simply put, I think of it as a dual process of delivery and discovery.
Mm.
So, on the one hand, the teacher needs to deliver certain truths, insights, lessons, however you want to say it. But so it's not just sort of this free for all that you described. There's a process, structure to it. There's delivery happening, and in those cases, the teacher is a bit more the expert. Teacher knows more than the average person in the room. On the other hand, there's the discovery piece. And so the discovery, and that's really where people begin to get ownership of something. And so that's where they're really learning, is when they discover. And I try to look at both of those working hand in hand, but coaching certainly is more on the discovery side.
Mhm.
It's more about asking questions. It's about even reflecting back what you're hearing from the person, that they could discover a new awareness or connect some dots in a way that they hadn't connected before, so that they can then act on that new discovery. So I'll kind of pause there just with delivery and discovery, and I see where you want to go next with the conversation before I go any deeper into that.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's very helpful to have those two kind of categories. In my own curriculum that I write, I I say, I have three things I want to get accomplished, and one is just fellowship. So there's a question that we kind of get to know each other a little bit more. And then there's a section that is information, which is like I said, I guess that's the delivery part. You know, you probably don't know who the Pharisees were, and so here's information about who the Pharisees were. But then there's the transformation part that I have, that is the what aha do you have, or what difference does this make? And here's a spiritual discipline that you can use maybe in this week to help you ponder this truth and let the Spirit work in you. Um, so I'm glad to hear you say that, because it does fit in with what I do.
I must be right
You
because
must be
I
right.
align with that's good.
Apparently, you are just
That's how
brilliant.
I judge everything, the validity of anything, right, is to align with what I already and be with. I'm team.
But I am ready to be corrected or informed otherwise as well. So yeah, share with us maybe. I know you're a teacher in your own church. You teach a class.
Mhm.
Um, so how do you integrate this kind of delivery discovery in your teaching in your class?
Yeah, and I will say I do not do this perfectly. So if anybody ever eavesdrops in and like, oh well, he's not that great at this. Hey, welcome to the party. Um, but the way I try to do it is, I mean, I have 3 seminary degrees. I probably do know more, or at least I got a whole bunch of commentaries that I look at in preparing for a lesson. So I do come ready to impart some information. So I just get that. But where I try to bring in the discovery piece is I do from the beginning of every class, try to get people participating in the conversation, the discussion of scripture. And again, I'm for right or for wrong, I'm deeply informed by the adult learning principle that the person talking is the person learning. And so
Okay.
I'm going to try to get there to be conversation without it devolving into opinions.
Mhm.
Like you shouldn't be interested in my opinion on the passage. I'm really not interested in your opinion. I am interested in how you apply this. I'm interested in kind of what you take away from this. And I have the deck stacked a little bit in my favor with the class I teach, because it's the parents of teens and students class. So it's people desperate for answers. Parents of teenagers and college students, basically, is what it is. Those parents. And so there's a ready application for every session, which is, as parents, what do we do with this?
Mhm.
And it's open that not every parent in the room is going to apply or make the same application. There are different kinds of applications. So for example, this past week, we're looking at Genesis 2, and we're looking at the creation of humanity and a garden, this whole idea of kind of order and chaos. Like in the midst of this created order, there's this garden, and within that order, Adam is given the mandate to cultivate it, to care for it, and so there's a participation with God in kind of the creating and dominion and all that kind of stuff. And so the application is, okay, in what way as a parent are you being a good steward of what God has entrusted you to? Adam names animals and cultivates a garden. That has application in your life. And so again, people had different applications, of that general principle, but having the discussion and then having people learn from one another about how they're applying that in their own parenting makes it practical, kind of gets at that transformation piece, so that they're not just walking away thinking, now where's the Tigris River? That's not. Uh, and I also think that's part of that delivery is I try to steer the conversation away from the rabbit trails of, again, I'm just using that passage for example. Was it onyx, or what was the precious mineral or whatever that's described? not helpful. Was it a pearl? I don't know. Who cares? Where's Eden? You don't know. So keeping it away from those tangents and onto, if it's not something that you can make truth of and apply in your life, you're wasting your time. So that's a delivery piece of keeping things pointed in the right direction. But that means asking the right kinds of questions and getting the people in the room to ask and address the right kinds of questions in order that scripture would make a difference in their lives.
So like there are different types of questions. Probably the most basic thing is don't ask a yes or no question, or a one-word answer question is kind of.
Which is what we really hate about most curriculum, right? Who told Eve to eat the fruit?
The
serpent?
Like I know we should use this, but I don't think that sounds right.
Exactly. And I know that's not a yes/no question, but a lot of curriculum questions are basically some version of can you read? Like what were the four rivers? Well, it's written right there. That's not helpful. So it's not like looking up an answer. But anyway, I digress.
Well, let's talk about the coaching questions. Are there different types of coaching questions, or is it your approach to asking the question? What makes a good coaching question?
Well, a good coaching question fits where you are in the conversation. So that might help to think, what's a good coaching conversation look like? And you can kind of think of a good coaching conversation following maybe, by the way, there are all these coaching models out there that kind of describe the same sort of thing, but you can think that a conversation, the first part of it is focus. So whatever it is we're talking about, let's get to some kind of focus piece of it. And then it would be, there's some new awareness that comes from the focus. And then there's an application of new awareness. And so, for example, you don't read a passage at the beginning of a class and ask, what will you do with this? That's an application question. We're not there yet. So you're going to, at the beginning, ask questions that explore. And by exploring, you eventually get to focus. Like what's really important about this. And so then you would want to be asking questions to begin with that explore and eventually get to a focus of a pinch point. And then you would want to ask the kind of questions that explore options, like what possibilities come out of this passage, for your own life. And then finally, you're kind of narrowing to what could you do with this? What will you do with this? Commitments. And that's where, again, most of the time you're not going to ask yes/no questions because they just don't explore very much. But you might ask a yes/no question when you're looking for commitment. But you're only looking for commitment near the end of a conversation when people have decided, I'm going to apply the truth of this passage or this lesson in this way. Yes, I will, have that conversation with my child, or no, I will not engage in that behavior anymore, whatever the application is. There could be a yes, no. But for the most part, they're open-ended questions. They're what, they're how. There are also questions that aren't about inviting. You don't want to invite a person to go into their little mental file folder and try to find the right answer. So the example would be, if you ask somebody, what's the capital of Arkansas? Well, I either know that or don't know that, but there's a little file folder in my mind that I get to Little Rock. Ding, ding, ding. That's not new awareness. That's regurgitation of information. So a better type of question is something like, where do you enjoy going on vacation? Oh, I have to think about that. I have to piece together things that I already know. I piece them together in a new way to come up with an insight. Little Rock is not an insight. That's an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask questions that create insight, not just answers to things.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, again, I teach parents of teens and students questions like, what's most challenging about your teenager right now? Okay, well, do you have an hour, Um, and now how does this passage address that challenge?
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm inviting people to connect dots. And the other thing about those good coaching questions is they require the person to work. So it's work to connect those dots. And let's face it, not everybody on a Sunday morning wants to work that hard. And that's okay, but those are the kinds of questions that they expand, they create insight, they try to invite people to connect dots in new ways, and then eventually to apply those insights.
Mm-hmm. Is it, let's say you've got a class of, the class I teach, I'll just put it that way, I've got, say 10, 12, 14 people on a Sunday morning. Is this a good approach to use for a dozen people, or is it better for a smaller group? Or, do you have an idea of, this is kind of the limit. Once you get this many people, then you're really not able to do this.
You need, if you're going to get over about 15, 18 people, you are going to need some facilitation skills.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're asking a lot of questions, again, the person talking is the person learning. So facilitation skills, what I mean is getting people to talk to each other in productive ways. And then, so you're having a big conversation as a class, but you're facilitating smaller conversations as a part of that. And again, I don't know that everybody has those kinds of facilitation tools and techniques at hand. But I do find that you can have kind of one collective conversation with 12 to maybe 18 people. But when you get more than that, you're going to have to be able to facilitate smaller conversations as a part of the larger conversation. And so ways I do that sometimes, and I think in terms of a person could have a conversation with himself or herself. So that's solo. They can have a conversation with a partner. They can have a conversation in a triad, which often has a little less anxiety than a one-on-one conversation. You know, 3 people, somebody can be quiet if they want to be. You can have a small group conversation, and then you can have a large group, the entire group conversation. And so depending on the size of the group, I'll use those different facilitation groupings to help for whichever question is appropriate for that size processing. So, for example, the question, what's most challenging about your teenager right now? If I'm in a larger group, I might have them write that down on an index card. Well, that's a solo processing.
Yeah.
And then I might have them share it in a group of 3, see, which things showed up, because the person talking is a person learning. And then I might have the triads report out what were some of the common challenges. And then we may go into, okay, how does this passage address those? And again, we may do that now in the triads because they've already established rapport. Those are facilitation skill. I think of facilitation as the kissing cousin of coaching. Coaching tends to be one-on-one. Facilitation is some of the same dynamics, but in a group context.
Yeah. Good. So, do you have? If somebody wanted to learn more about this, how to use a coaching question, where would they go? Do you have that? Do you have resources that you suggest for that?
Well, Rick, we have an entire ministry called Coach Approach Ministries. And just to be very, transparent, it is not a ministry primarily geared toward helping Bible teachers incorporate coaching. But most people who come through our training in the last 15, 18 years, however long we've been around, do tend to be preachers and teachers. And so they're making application. And so we've got a couple of podcast episodes on this topic. We've got some blog posts on this topic. Again, most of our training doesn't really squarely address this, but the podcast, the blog posts, a few books, one book, Faith Coaching, that I co-authored, gets into this, talks about how do you use coaching to help facilitate spiritual formation and spiritual growth, because it's a more of a discovery. And the principle there is you want ownership. The person who's developing and growing and being formed, you want them to own the process as much as possible. You as the teacher, coach, facilitator, you're just facilitating that. But the coaching approach really creates ownership for the other person. And so, again, the book Faith Coaching really gets into how do you help do that, whether it's one-on-one or more in a classroom group setting.
There's a sense in which, from what you just said there, that I guess this goes with learning in general anyway, but maybe especially with coach kind of learning, the person who is not the coach, the coachee, I guess, the student, the class member, they have to be open and receptive. They have to be like, they want something from this besides, let's just have our coffee and donuts and fellowship time. They have to want something out of this for the change to happen in their lives.
They have to be motivated. Change requires a motivated person. And I think the two ditches that a Bible teacher can fall into is the ditch of sort of complacency to say, if they show up motivated, we can help them. If they show up not motivated, oh, well, that's, you probably do have more influence than that. But the other ditch you could fall into is saying, I have to get them motivated on this one thing, otherwise I have failed. I think the room in between that's more of a coaching approach, more of a discovery approach, is what part of this could they be motivated about, and how do I stir that motivation? And so rather than thinking, I got to get you to make this application, if I lean in as the Bible teacher to being curious and open, and so the way I think about it is, I'm really curious what part of this you're motivated around. I am absolutely assured that there's some aspect of this that you're going to be motivated around. Either that or you don't have a pulse. What I don't know is what part you're motivated about. And I might be surprised by it. And so, but I'm going to facilitate a process by which you discover the part that you're motivated around. And then the lesson is going to help connect with your motivation. And that's where you're going to make application. You'd be really comfortable that not everybody's going to move at the same pace, the same direction. They're not going to come out with the same answers or application. But you also have to really trust that, of course, they're going to be motivated around some part of this. Otherwise they're probably dead. But where I like to say coaching creates awareness is they may not know what part they're motivated. So that would be a creating awareness and facilitating them now being aware of, I really do care about this. I really do want more than coffee and coffee cake, from this experience. So it's the dynamic. I talk about it as being engaged, but not controlling. I'm going to try to engage you to help you be, to discover that motivation, but I can't control that. I can't manufacture that or make that happen.
It's like there's the approach of someone could be in your role in your class, and that person's take on teaching is, this week I'm going to talk about 3 things to do about your child who procrastinates all the time. And next week, we're going to talk about 3 things to help your child really love reading their Bible. It's like here's the
Right.
here's the answer. Da 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 da. The approach you're talking about is almost more like, well, we've discovered that we want our kids to learn responsibility, and one of the irresponsible things all of us deal with is procrastination. What have you learned that's helped you to deal with procrastination? Would that be an approach, a coach kind of question, just to throw that kind of thing out there?
Yeah, certainly. And notice that that's a narrow, it's not like a super narrow question, but it's also not this sort of wide open, is, I don't know, sort of amorphous question that you could have 1,000 different answers for, or 1,000 different responses to. You've got to focus. Now you're looking at options.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an options question. What have you found helpful? And now we're exploring. And in there, you have to be a good facilitator too, to not let it become an advice giving. If everyone would parent the way I parent, no child would ever procrastinate. And this is where it's good to help your class members have a decent dose of humility. And what works for them doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And that's, again, part of that group facilitation where you're trying to keep it a safe space for everybody. But yeah, that would be a really good coaching question, because it's discovery oriented, and it's helping them connect dots in maybe a new way.
Mm-hmm. And then when you, I know I've heard you teach about coaching, and have heard others talk about coaching as well. And it seems like an important part of the coaching contract, if you will, that you have with someone else is that you're willing to hold them to some accountability. Like, you're willing to be an accountability partner with them, or to challenge them. Okay, then now we know this. You've said yes to the question, do you want to make a change about this? What are you going to do? And do you need me to help? How can I help? And it seems like that would be helpful when, again, you aren't just leaving the classroom saying, well, now I know what the names of the 4 rivers were. Now I know,
Right.
oh, I've made a commitment that this week I'm going to do something.
Yeah, and I would distinguish commitments and accountability. So, so you and just think of how much to get into this, but so not everything that shows up in like a professional, formal coaching relationship shows up in a Bible teaching context.
Right.
And so accountability is one of those that it always shows up in a professional, formal coaching relationship. It doesn't always find its way into these coach approach kind of applications. And so because people haven't always willingly signed up for, oh yeah, I want accountability. People are paying you for coaching. They want some accountability, and then they're not always accountable to the coach, but they're accountable to some kind of, they're trying to create some kind of structure to ensure follow through. I mean, that's all accountability is. It could be a person, or it could be some other structure. And so I know where I try to weave that in my own teaching ministry is I don't think about them being accountable to me. One, that's why I'm not a pastor anymore. I don't, by the way, anyone who doesn't know me, I'm kind of joking about this, but only kind of. You've got your life, go live it. God bless you. I don't need to be, I've got kids to parent. I don't need to be your mother. That kind of accountability. But what I can do is help you identify some structures that would help you follow through on things you want to follow through on. And so if you're walking away from a lesson on Genesis 2 and you say, I want to be a better steward of the what God has put me in care of, including my children, And one way that I want to be a better steward of my care for my children is I want to make them wait. I want to help support them as they make wise decisions about college. What they need from me this week on that is to sit down with them and just kind of lay the process out. And like even just designing that action creates a bit of structure to help ensure a follow through. It takes sort of a desire or a wish and turns it into a plan. And then, from there, what will help you do that? Again, I ain't calling you about it or texting you about it. Now, there are teachers who would do that, and I'm not saying that's out of bounds, but that's not my style. But it can also be one of the beauties of working in a group. They can hold each other accountable. That's a power. So when you start getting good conversation going among the group members, and you don't have to be the hub for all that, that's even better. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, Rick, but
no, I think actually that kind of takes some pressure off that for the teacher, that it really is it's kind of up to them to make the decision and to make what they need to do to get to where they want to be as a Christian. And so, my responsibility as the teacher is to give them some information, to lead them to some good, thoughtful questions that help them think, how does this connect dots with my daily life? And then kind of say, okay, then now that you know that, this is up to you and God to do this. I'm here if you need me, but I'm not holding your hand. I'm not holding 12 people's hands this week, as everybody's trying to make these connections.
Yeah, and it also gets us out of this idea of if some people kind of get in this trap of thinking, oh, if only I had even more information, then I would make application. Not true. Most of the time, it takes very little information, and it becomes almost to use your word from earlier, it becomes kind of a pattern of procrastination to think, I just need to learn more. I'm not against learning, but usually it's a little bit of learning and a whole lot of application. And so it keeps it from being this sort of dysfunctional, dependent relationship where they say, oh, I would live like Christ if only I knew more. If only Rick, my Bible teacher, could give me some more information, deeper, whatever. And it's like, there's apply this amount of information and then we'll go do something else,
Yeah. I don't know who said it, but there's a quote I love that said, it's not the parts about the Bible that I don't understand that bother me, it's the parts that I do understand.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
I already know what Jesus said about X, Y, and Z and something on the Mount. And I don't have to learn the original Greek. It's I just have to try not to murder somebody with my thoughts this week.
Yeah, I'm gonna work on not murdering and not lusting and not being jealous. Yeah, those things. And I think kind of getting back to your question about Bible teachers that have really impacted me, I think that's why I like the people who tend to move toward ethics, toward how now shall you live based on this. Because if it's not impacting how we live daily, regularly, and man, I could get sucked into that as quickly as anybody. I love just to learn, but if I don't make an application of it, I'm not becoming a little Christ. And so that's the goal. The goal isn't to learn. The goal is to be transformed. Learning supports transformation. And so don't get looped into just this sort of endless cycle of learn, and it never get expressed in transformation.
I want to thank Chad Hall for his time and expertise that he has given us today, thinking about the integration of coaching types of questions with our Bible study leading. If you would like to learn more about how to teach the Bible better, then I invite you to go to greatbibleteachers.com and sign up for the enews that we have. Because every Tuesday, there's a blog article that comes out that talks about teaching. And then on every Thursday, there's an email you'll get that will tell you about the interview of that week. So I invite you to sign up so that you'll be aware of what is happening. Thanks for joining us again today.